She has tapped into the most up-to-date knowledge on brain research, and she's written a book called Get More Power from Your Brain. So as a facilitator, Eileen has led executive, supervisor, and management groups across Canada and the US. And she's a senior associate of the Management Research Group in Portland. And she facilitates their assessment-based development system in Leadership 360 and strategic leadership practices. She's here today because she has been extremely successful with her half-day webinars. And here are some comments. Now, each of these, I didn't put the person's name on them, but this is a recent comment from one person. It was a pleasure to attend your class and learn so much. I felt it was really useful to have exercises in the middle of the class, which kept the class interactive and my focus stayed sharp. The breakout rooms were a bit awkward at first, but that was due to the Zoom video part of it. They got easier to be in as time passed. I felt the course was very well designed and would give this a 10 out of 10 on all criteria, such as instructor knowledge and style, material, interest level, interactive aspects. So, Eileen, talk to us about the interactive aspects of the half-day webinars you put together. What are you doing to get people engaged?
Well, the biggest challenge is to get people to speak. So I do a lot of work ahead of time to encourage that. So I send a welcome letter that explains, you know, if we're using Zoom, I send an introduction to Zoom and so on. I remind them to download updates of Zoom and so on. And I give my phone number and for texting and my email address. And we send materials ahead of time, usually a copy of the PowerPoint and what I call a handout or a manual. My first few slides are focused on welcoming them and asking them to get comfortable, asking them to be present, have a notebook ready, and most importantly, that their questions are not only helpful to them, but they're helpful to everybody else. So it's, in a sense, it's a kindness to ask a question, because most people are interested in the answer because they're thinking something similar anyway.
So when you say you send this welcome letter, it's that's a curiosity. So an organization might hire you. It's not the individuals themselves that are hiring you. It's an organization. So you're not leaving it up to the organization to communicate with the members who will attend. You're actually getting the organization to individually send information to the participants.
Yes, so I don't reach out to participants because I don't have their email addresses. Usually I have their names. So I send the materials, I send the welcome letter, I explain how I'm going to start to the organizer, and yes, I ask them to send information, and depends on the organization. Sometimes I even send, last minute information that morning, or certainly sometimes I send information as a follow-up. I know you're supposed to be able to put it in chat. I haven't been it hasn't worked very well for me, but I know it can work. Anyway, the key thing is that I want them to share with me and with each other, their response to what we're talking about and their questions, so that so I will, encourage them. I try to limit the size of the group to 20 or less. And, but even then, so even with 20, I find they can unmute. I say, well, of course, if you've got a barking dog or a crying child in the background, please don't unmute. But if I prefer you unmute and just ask the question. Sometimes I was on Microsoft Teams this morning, and they seem to be able to put a hand, not the real hand, but put the hand in the person's screen. I know, anyway, different ways of getting my attention. I often ask for a group that size if somebody will volunteer to keep an eye on chat and to let me know what's in chat, and either to read it to me or I look at it and I read it. So because I'm conscious that maybe some people who can't see very well, or or even can't have the camera on, they're only depending on sound. So,
well, I will say that I love the idea of the welcome letter. I think that's fantastic. And I'm going to remind everybody on the call, please drop your questions for Eileen into chat. Okay, I'm keeping an eye on chat there. I also like the idea that you ask a participant to help you with chat. So that means that you can focus on the students or the participants full time without having to break your rhythm there, which is interesting. I never would have thought of that. And I certainly did not think of, I really did leave it up to organizations to deal with whatever. So I like that idea of the welcome letter. The exercises you're talking about. So what would be, and I know you've got your own specialty that you're teaching, but what might be an exercise that you send out to them ahead of time?
So I see somebody asking about an agenda. So yes, I have an agenda on one of the slides at the beginning as to what we're going to do during the time, whatever it is. One thing I did recently that worked very well was between where I had 2 4-hour sessions, and then they had, I gave them something to do in the afternoon of the first session. But in the morning, I had a quiz ready for them, which was worth 30 points if they wanted to keep track of the points. I was careful to say that I wasn't going to, they weren't going to have to share the answers with me. I treated it as a review, and so they had about 5 minutes to complete. There was about 6 questions, and then I put them in breakout rooms of 4 each, and they were to help each other answer the questions and check the questions. And then when they came back together, and I also had time to pop into each group, and sometimes they asked me a question in the group because none of them could get the answer to whatever the question was. So when they came back together, I again simply asked, so question 1, I asked somebody to answer it, and then I added to it, and yeah, so it was a great review, and they seemed to really enjoy. People love doing quizzes.
Well, and it makes the information you're sharing stickier, for lack of a better word. But let's stop at this idea of the breakout room. So I'm not sure how other people on this call react to that. I have not yet used breakout rooms. And I think, and I'm pretty sure, knowing you the way I do, that this would have been a challenge for you initially, that you are doing something in front of a group, you're getting paid to do it, and you're about to use a new technology, something maybe you haven't used before. So what was that experience like for you doing it for the first time? And I see, both Linda Langley and Vicki Bates are saying they've used them, and Dale is saying they've used them. So what was that first step like of using a new tool?
The first step was back in June 2020. And just like when I was a school teacher and I thought everybody had an open area classroom, I thought everybody did breakout rooms and polls and so on. And I was doing this with one of the Chartered Professional Accountants groups. And so I did breakout rooms, but I really didn't know how to do it. I did polls, and at the end of it, and this particular one, they had somebody technical with me the whole time, although she didn't know how to do breakout rooms. So, we muddled through, but at the end, she said, "You're the first one who's done breakout rooms and polls." And I thought, anyway, I recommend you try one thing at a time, and if you can get a group of friends together or something, or even a couple of people to practice ahead of time. Tell you the truth, I've never managed to do that. but so I guess I practice on my, I think really, because today is, we're expected to do so much and learn so much. I use, I've taken a course from somebody called Corey Melanson, who teaches a course called Beyond Text and Talk. And she says, fail forward. That is, prepare as much as you can, but, be prepared to not do it perfectly the first time. And
so it's Corey, Corrie.
yes, Melanson.
And then Melanson.
Right.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I'm putting that in chat for everybody.
Yeah, you'll find her, and she is amazing in terms of all the different bells and whistles you could use. I haven't actually used any of the ones she's taught because I haven't. Again, you got to practice. I want to use something called Google Jamboard, but I don't dare use it without practicing that one.
And Elizabeth Pierce is asking if you're using a special webcam because your image is so sharp.
I'm using a little webcam. It's a Logi webcam, and it's at the top of my laptop screen. When I first started, and Mary Jane was my best critic, she said my voice wasn't clear enough. It wasn't good enough. And in the end, and I've still got, well, no, I've managed to take them back, but I bought different headsets and different microphones and so on. And, finally, it was the webcam that really worked well.
Yeah. So there's the idea, yes, of playing with new technology. And I'm just going to move to the next student that gave some feedback to Eileen, just in case there's information here that we can share. So what was communicated was very clear and easy to follow. Although I personally shy away from breakout rooms and individual participation, I realize that it's good for me and I just need to get over it. So thank you for that part. And I wanted to include this because I think many of us have been on calls and in the day of face-to-face workshops, been in front of people who are this. And sometimes we, let them stay in their individual bubble. And this person was really thanking Eileen for helping them get over that improved their learning. I enjoyed the 2-day format in order to absorb and refresh what was learned the previous day. I never would have thought of that. The review of the material was also helpful. An interesting thing I noticed after the first day was that I was completely exhausted and needed to go and have a nap. That certainly must be a testament to the fact that I was learning and flexing my brain. So I loved their reaction to being tired. This is one of the reasons why I've hesitated to do the longer ones, because of that exhaustion level.
Well, I can comment on that particular person. She actually had a severe concussion about 4 years ago. She's still recovering from it. It was a car accident. I think quite a lot of people would be tired at the end of 3.5 to 4 hours of paying attention and taking part in the various exercises. I've had people tell me, I had one tell me recently, I was shaking. I was very anxious at the beginning. I knew I should ask questions, but I was very anxious about it. But then the other thing I do is I have everybody's name and I keep track of who's asked a question and who hasn't. And then I'll call on people. I'll say, Mary Jane, in a few minutes, I'll say more like, Mary Jane, in a minute or two, I'm going to ask you, what do you think about X? So I'll give Mary Jane a chance to think about that. And then I'll ask, so Mary Jane, what do you think about X?
So I want to point this out. So I want to hold on to that point for a second. Steve is got a question for you tonight. Steve, I'm going to come back to that in a second. But Eileen, this idea of warning people that you're going to ask them a question, that would never have occurred to me. And I think that comes from your teaching background and your education. What a lovely thing to do. I just ask people.
Well, there are two types of people in the world. They're called extroverts, who are quite happy to start talking before they finish thinking. In fact, they use talking to think.
Yeah.
And then there's introverts who really want to get everything figured out really clearly in their own mind.
Yeah, beautiful.
Before they speak. And sometimes their own thinking is so clear, they think they have spoken.
Right. And, you know, sometimes I get pushback because I'll say to somebody, well, I just did it today. Earlier today, I was working with a very small group and I would just say, Marianne, what do you think of that? And there were definitely two people in the group that were not comfortable with my doing it on that level. And I'd forgotten, you see, this tip.
Well,
but the other thing that I want to point out that Eileen does, and I don't have her copy here, but I think I can show you mine. So I do have everybody's name so that I do make sure I have people's names in front of me for a webinar, but I'm very sloppy about it. I just do this. And Eileen creates this lovely chart. There, she's got it. And so that she has room to write down when they last spoke and all kinds of information about them as she's going through, so that she doesn't she doesn't call on the same person twice in a row. She makes sure she calls on everybody and gets that participation going. So I think that's brilliant.
One of the things about the groups I teach are most of them are getting PD hours for being there. So
that's professional development hours.
Right. So they know that I'm tracking them, if you like. I mean, I'm not, that they're being tracked, that they actually came into the meeting, but
right.
I mean, they can easily turn their video off and turn the mute and be doing their email or whatever. So Absolutely. If they know I'm going to be calling on somebody, and I tell them ahead of time, I want to call on each of you at some point. You can let me know in chat if that's not appropriate for you and so on. But I also, one of the things, Mary Jane, about calling on very quiet people who really don't want to speak is if they think you're going to do that, you've lost their attention. Like, they're not listening to the content anymore. They're just horrified that they're going to be called on any minute. And so they're not learning. So, I know.
Shame on me. Good for you. Good for you.
You have to allow for the different learning styles, the different, people do tell themselves that everybody's watching or everybody's listening or everybody's going to think I'm an idiot. If I can address that, I will.
I love that.
None of us are perfect. None of us are going to, say, we all tend to look at other people as doing much better than us.
So let's take a look at what's here in chat. So Steve McClellan is talking about getting people's attention or drive home a point. On TV, people can change their camera, they can do close up or so on. So he's wondering about standing while presenting. And Eileen, I think both of you and I have talked about
and I know,
switching to a standing desk.
Right. My associate trainer, John Tatry, does stand the whole time. He's set up his room as a studio. He's got a TV and radio background. So and I have heard, and I haven't got around to buying it yet, and that is that Amazon apparently has a rising desk. That is, you can simply press a button and it rises up and down and so on, which I think sounds wonderful. The other thing, everybody, is be careful not to give yourself too many things to do. I think Mary Jane's making me sound a little bit more organized than I really am.
I don't think so, Eileen.
I limit what I ask myself to do. Otherwise, I get distracted and I can't do everything. So generally my focus is on the whatever I got present on the PowerPoint and whatever questions I'm asking and so on. So But because of what I teach, I mean, I teach about the brain and about people thinking. So I think that helps.
Absolutely. So Mariana's talked about having the chart, but difficult for large groups. And you're absolutely right, Mariana. If you're presenting, and I've had to present to groups as large as 300, what I do in that case is work with the organizer to gather a list of, I'll call them volunteers, but people that the organizer knows will be comfortable on my calling on them. Because you're right, you can't possibly create that kind of back and forth with 300 people. So that's a possibility for you to consider. I'm just going to check all these messages here, Eileen.
Okay.
So Amy has a rising desk, so that's great. Ruth is saying some speakers use pre-recorded segments of their presentations, so they in the audience get a break from the same voice. Another way of breaking things up is using whiteboards or Google Docs to track ideas. So I haven't used a whiteboard in a presentation. Have you, Eileen?
I have, but again, I'm not very practiced with it.
Okay.
What I do use is Word documents that I have on my desktop. So I can share my PowerPoint, and then I can stop sharing my PowerPoint and share a Word document. So for instance, when I was doing that quiz, I prepared the Word document and they had it on the screen and they just answered it pencil and paper. I had a Word document this morning that was just a one-page in the handout, but I was able to call it up on the screen and ask them again to write. I mean, if they had printed it off, they could use the actual page, but they just you know, I suggest people have an 8.5 by 11 lined notepad and be ready.
So just checking here, Ruth. No, not Ruth, sorry, Mariana. We already talked about Ruth, but she uses some external tools to create games to refresh a long 4-hour class. But when people finish first and they have to wait for others, she realizes they get a little bit anxious. So some tools, there's another side that they work, but then they create another issue in terms of engagement. Amy Harrison is adding a great polling tool called Mentimeter. That works in large presentations. It's live polling with live results and is very engaging. So that's something for everybody to check out. Yeah. Annette is asking, and Eileen and I have had this conversation. I've had this conversation too with a lot of organization, the people that I work with that organize presentations. How important is it for the engagement of the participants that everyone has their video camera on?
Again, it would be lovely if everybody could have their video camera on. Yes. And in some cases, I'm teaching to a group where the internet connection isn't so good, so it's, you know, they can't. Most of the time, I can persuade probably at least half of them to have the video camera on. I ask if they can't put the video camera, would they at least put a photograph? Because I say, you know, I really like to teach to people. I don't like to teach to black screens. And you know, one of the early groups I did, that everybody had just their initials, a black screen and initials. So even though I had the name list, I couldn't figure out who was who. So that was a challenge. But people. Generally, I always am there at least 20 minutes before it starts. I talk to the people who've just arrived. I encourage them to turn their videos on, and then so I keep that chat going. So as each person arrives, I will ask them, you know, can you turn your video on? Sometimes they'll give a good reason why they're not going to. That's fair enough. I'm not going to insist on it. I'm just going to encourage it.
So Ruth has added that, you know, she thinks it is a courtesy to have the camera on. One of the things that I'll add there, in my case anyway, I do a lot of training in rural areas. And in that case, they don't necessarily have the broadband to be using their camera. Some of them are just phoning in on their phone to hear the audio. They're not even participating in that way. I tend to find someone who is on camera and keep them on my screen just so I have that interaction. But Eileen, I do like the notion of asking them to put a photo up. I hadn't thought of that, and I think that's very valuable.
Yes.
The other thing I like to keep in mind is that some people are not comfortable with the camera. And again, that's a personality thing, of course, but this world we've created where we're all on camera all the time, for some people it's extremely difficult, and I think we have to be generous for them.
Yes, and unfortunately they're telling themselves for whatever reason they don't look good enough, or their background doesn't look good enough, or and I try to address that and talk about the fact, I'm not expecting you to have beautiful clothes and hair and so on, and backgrounds, although sometimes people do have those created backgrounds, and they're fine.
Yeah. And Terry Cooper is sharing Communicating with Confidence presentation by Jeff Ansell on LinkedIn. He highly recommends that. And we have indeed gone over our half hour, Eileen. It sounds like we could have kept this conversation going for an hour, but I'll ask our participants if they have any last questions to put them in chat, please, because we would love to answer them. And that you're going to, most of you know anyway, that you're going to receive a digital version of the slide deck from today. The video itself will go up on the YouTube channel. And when you get to the YouTube channel, I would appreciate if you'd subscribe. If I get 100 subscribers, I can actually call it Inspire Conversation, and I would love to be able to do that. Is Zoom your preference, or are there other platforms you use? For me, I use what the client wants me to use. So I've done Teams, I've done, this week I'm doing Skype for Business, which I haven't had to do very often, and Google Meet. What about you, Eileen?
Well, I've had to do WebEx,
right,
and Microsoft Teams. And, my preference is Zoom, but clearly whatever the client uses and what the client wants is what I do. And if I'm unfamiliar with it, I'll ask for a practice session with somebody ahead of time.
Okay, great. And Blurry Background is an option. I did not know that. So I'm just going to get back up to that. For backgrounds, just select the blurry background. It shows the person clearly, but not the background or the company, or you can put the company's logo in the background. That's true. Can you please comment on the importance and spacing of breaks for participants to regenerate?
So some, again, because I teach for the Chartered Professional Accountants of each province, and they have rules. So they don't want more than a 15-minute break in a half day, which I think is a bit too few. So I prefer a 5-minute break every hour, and halfway through, a 10 to 12-minute break, because people need to go to the bathroom, and they need to grab a coffee, and you can't do both in 5 minutes. And if you don't give enough breaks, then people won't come back in time. So then they're missing the beginning. If people aren't back on time, I don't wait for them. I always feel it's a courtesy to the people who are there to start. And
so I try to do 2 10-minute breaks if I have to do 3 hours. So I see, I think that's the end of our questions, but if not, Eileen and I'll stay. So here's the link to the YouTube channel, and you'll receive that when you get the slide deck. Dawn has reminded us that Toastmasters is offering some information on how to teach on Zoom or facilitate on Zoom. And Ruth is saying that she is with one of the professional companies that Eileen's talking about that have professional development credits, and that they have left the break scheduling to the instructor. So some of our speakers schedule a short break every 70 minutes, 70 minutes. So that's good to know. And 2 upcoming webinars. We're changing our schedule a little bit. So in coming up on March 3rd, which is only next week, I'll be here talking about creating outstanding discovery calls. And this matches a blog post that went out 2 weeks ago. So it'll be partnering with that information. That's okay if you have to leave, no problem. And for this one, you can participate in this. If you arrive early and you want, I'll make you a panelist so that you can be on camera and participate. And the same with the one on March 11th, which is about creating effective and simple proposals. So thank you, everybody, for participating. And thank you, Eileen, because I've taken away a lot of great tips. And I hope that as you are learning new technology and getting new testimonials back about how successful it's been, that you'll let me know, and we'll do this again.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for your great questions. And you can reach me through eileenpease.com, and I'll be happy to answer your questions and send you more information if I can do that.
Okay.